Okay, so here's my video on constitutional principles, and some of the influential people in the Constitution were Plato. He believed that the government should create good for all mankind and that individual citizens needed to give up certain things for the good of all the other citizens. Also Aristotle, he believed that the ideal government should be concerned with the common good or the common interest of the citizens. And Machiavelli believed in republicanism and civic virtue, where citizens acted for the common good and they would put their selfish desires aside. And that's a hard one. It just is hard for all the citizens to do. And Hobbes, he believed in natural laws, where in nature, before people formed by a society, pre-existing principles arise. He mainly believed in social contract. Locke, he believed that all men are created equal and that people should have the freedom to act. He believed in social contracts between the people and their government, and there should be a limit to government. Montesquieu believed in the separation of power and that there should be three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. And he proposed the idea of checks and balances, which we use now. Rousseau agreed with Locke, but did not think that the majority would always act for the common good, which is true. So he believed that the role of the government was to ensure that the common good or the general welfare was protected. So he kind of tried to enforce that. Okay, some of the creators of the Constitution, I'm just going to talk about them a bit. So the creators of the Constitution, or what we call the Founding Fathers, were at the Constitutional Convention where the Constitution was created. George Washington presided over the whole convention, and the person who played a really big role in it was James Madison, who wrote the Virginia Plan, which was kind of like the start of the Constitution. And Edmund Randolph, he was the one who presented the Virginia Plan for creating a new government. And this kind of their idea was to propose a strong central government with the three branches, like we talked about before: legislative, executive, and judicial. And it enabled the legislative to veto state laws and use force against states that failed to fulfill their duties, and just kind of balance the power out. And there were plenty of founding fathers, but not all of them were there. But they made a lot of contributions to it. Like Thomas Jefferson, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was serving as ambassador or to France at the time of the convention. And John Adams, ambassador to Great Britain, he wrote the Defense of the Constitution of the Government of the United States of America. Thomas Paine wrote the influential pamphlet Common Sense, which immeasurably influenced the philosophy reflected in the Declaration of Independence. One of the U.S. founding fathers, Patrick Henry, was initially opposed to the very idea of the Constitution. He wanted to keep the Articles of Confederation, which was the previous document used before the Constitution. And then after a lot of ratification of it, they were able to come to the conclusion that they would add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution, and Henry really liked that. And so just some other people that were there, the Constitution proposed things like William Patterson, Benjamin Franklin, John Dickinson, John Rutledge, and there were many more, but that's all that I named. Okay, now some of the personal clauses of the Constitution. I'm just going to name some general things and some that are related to like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So freedom of speech, press, religion, and petition, just all those. Right to bear and keep arms, the protection from quartering of soldiers, protection from unreasonable search and seizure, right to due process of the law, right to trial by jury, speedy trial, public trial, right to civil trial by jury, to civil trial, prohibition of excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment, protection of rights not enumerated in the Constitution, protection of the powers of the states and the people, and citizenship rights. Gives the right to any citizen that is born in the United States, and they have the right to equal protection of the national and state laws, the right to be free of any law that deprives a person of life, liberty, or property without due process. They also have voting rights, gave the people the right to vote regardless of race or color, as long as a U.S. citizen. Women's voting rights. This gave all the citizens the right to vote regardless of which gender they were. And voting age, any citizen above 18 was able to vote, and 18 too, 18 and older. And our Constitution and its amendments are protecting us from anything that isn't right, and it can save us from something that we didn't do. Okay, public clauses. Here's just a few of the public clauses. I'm just going to name them, then talk about them. Popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review, and federalism. But there's, like I said, there's more, but these are just some of the main ones. So popular sovereignty, all of the power lies in the hands of the people of the United States who are sovereign. Government can only govern if it is given permission by those who are governed. The overall meaning of this is that the national government draws its power from the people of the United States, that the people have given their government the power through the Constitution, and the government they're the only ones that have the power to make decisions because the people who are governed by them give them the power to do so. But if they abuse their power at all, then the people have the right to overthrow their government and change it. Okay, limited government. This is the principle that's a little self-explanatory, but it means that the government is only able to do things that the people and things that the people that they have government give them the power to do. So unlike the public laws before, it's the opposite, where the people are the only source of any and all government's authority, and government has only the authority that the people have given to it. So the government has to follow all the constitutional laws and principles for it to be able to even have control and power over the people. Okay, separation of powers. In parliamentary system, the legislative, executive, and judicial powers of government are all gathered in the hands of a single agency. Our government runs almost the same, except the three powers are separated. This is called a presidential system, where the three powers are separated into three distinct and independent branches. Our Constitution distributes the power of the national government among the Congress, President, and the courts. Checks and balances. The government is organized around three separate branches. Though the Constitution says that these three powers must be separated, they are still connected and are not completely independent of each other. The thing that ties them together is known as checks and balances. This means that each branch is subject to a number of constitutional restraints or checks by the other branches. This means that each branch has certain powers with which it can check the operations of the other two. Congress has the power to make laws, but the president may veto any act of Congress. But Congress can also override a presidential veto by 2/3 vote in each house. Checks and balances gives power to each branch to override the other and make sure they are in line. Judicial review. The power of judicial review is the power of courts to determine whether what government does is in accord with what the Constitution says. The role of the judicial branch is to determine whether or not a law is constitutionally acceptable. That means that any laws that the government creates cannot break any of our constitutional rights. For example, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, and judicial review is the power to declare unconstitutional, illegal, null, and void of a government action that violates the Constitution. Federalism. Our government works in a federal form by distributing the powers that they have on a territorial basis. The principle of federalism is the division of power among a central government and several regional governments. By spreading the powers throughout the different branches, this makes the Constitution stronger. Okay, the modern influence of the Constitution. In court, it's used a lot, so I'm just going to give a few examples where people were in trouble, to say, and then using their rights from the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they were able to defend themselves. So here's just a few examples. This one was Reynolds versus the United States. This case was tested the limits of religious liberty. The court ruled that the law banning polygamy they said it was constitutional and didn't infringe upon individuals, But according to the First Amendment right, you have free exercise of religion, and that's what they used to defend themselves, and they were able to become free. And then another example is the New York Times Company versus Sullivan, and the amendment they used to protect themselves was the freedom of press, and the court said that the First Amendment protects newspapers even when they print false statements, as long as the newspapers did not act with actual malice, and Sullivan was able to use this to protect him. Cantwell versus Connecticut. This case was held in court, and the government was told that they had no role in determining religious truth, and that's freedom of religion, obviously. And the court said that they technically wanted him to be in trouble, but he has the freedom to choose his religion, so he was able to be freed from infringement by the federal government as well as state governments for that. These are my works cited where I got my information.